They stole everything. My tribe's land, our future. The HOA handed it over to a mining company thinking I'd never find out. But I did, and now they have no idea who they're messing with. I guess I should start by telling you a little about myself. I'm not one of those guys who just grew up in the city and never looked back. It's easy for people to forget where they come from once they start climbing the ladder, but I never really did. My roots, my family, my tribe, are everything to me. You know, I'm from the Navajo Nation. It's not just where I was born, it's who I am. The land, the traditions, the way things are passed down, it's all part of me. When you grow up surrounded by that, it becomes a part of your soul. I remember spending summers on the reservation as a kid. My brothers and I would run around the land, barefoot, not a care in the world. My dad used to take us on long drives across the land, showing us places that meant something to our people, places where ancestors walked. He'd tell us stories about how this land was more than just dirt and rocks. It was a living part of who we are. I used to think that was all some kind of metaphor, you know? But after seeing what happened, I get it now. That land is us. Things weren't easy for us growing up. Like a lot of Native families, we didn't have much, but there was always love. My mom and dad worked hard to make sure we had what we needed, even if it wasn't always what we wanted. Dad always said, "It's not about what you own, it's about who you are and how you treat the land that gave you life." At the time, I thought it was just some old wisdom. But looking back, it hits differently now. Eventually, life took me out of the reservation. College, career, things moved fast. I ended up in the city, far away from the dust and the open sky. But every time I'd go back home, something felt different. It was like the land itself was quieter, as if something was changing, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it. The old folks always said the world was moving too fast, that it would eventually catch up with us. I didn't understand what they meant back then, but now I get it. That's exactly what happened. When I finally settled down with Liza and the kids, I thought I had it all figured out. We were doing good, you know, nice house, decent job, 2 great kids. But there's always this pull to the land. Every couple of years, I'd take a trip back home to see the family, check in on things. Last time I went, I didn't expect to see what I saw. Liza, the kids, and I were driving through the reservation, heading towards my folks' place. It was like any other trip, but the closer we got to the land I knew so well, something was off. The trees were missing. The roads felt different. As we drove, I noticed trucks, equipment, and, yeah, you guessed it, big machines tearing through the landscape like they had no business being there. I figured it was just some small project at first, maybe clearing land for a new community center or something. But then I started asking around, and that's when I found out they weren't clearing land for anything good. No community center, no school, no hospital. They were making way for a mining operation, a huge mining operation. And what pissed me off even more? They had permission from the local HOA. I'm talking about my own people, my own tribe, signing off on this. I knew right then that something wasn't right. The land had always been sacred to us, not just for the resources, but for the history, the culture, the ancestors who walked there before us. And now it was being sold off, piece by piece. For what? To line some fat cat's pockets? To feed the greed of some corporation that didn't give a damn about us? It made my blood boil. I thought back to all those years I spent away, working, getting ahead, and I thought about my dad's words. The land is us. What the hell had happened to that? How did we let this slip away? So I started digging. I didn't just want to know what was going on. I needed to know why. And that's when I started to uncover some things that made me sick to my stomach. Things no one was supposed to find out. But you know me. Once I get my mind set on something, there's no turning back. I wasn't just going to sit there and watch this happen. Not on my watch. And that's where it all started. Right there, when I found out that my tribe's land had been handed over to a mining company. That's when I realized that not only had they sold us out, but they'd sold the future of my people too. And if that was happening on my watch, you bet I was going to do everything I could to stop it. So I kept asking around, trying to piece everything together. The more I dug, the more I started hearing the same thing from people. It's above our heads, they'd say. The decision's already made. Nothing can be done. And that's when I knew something was really off. Because I don't care who you are. Nothing happens on this land without someone raising a hand and saying, "Wait, hold on a second." I decided to go straight to the source. The HOA. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're really going to walk right up to them? But listen, I had to. I didn't know who else to trust, and I needed answers. It felt like every step I took, things were getting murkier, and I was getting deeper into something that I didn't even understand yet. I set up a meeting with Karen, the head of the HOA. To be honest, I'd heard a few things about her before. People called her the Queen, because she had this reputation for getting things done. Some said she was efficient, others, well, they didn't say much good about her. But I figured if she was the one signing off on this land deal, I needed to hear it from her directly. So I went. I'll never forget the look on her face when I walked into that office. She was sitting behind this huge wooden desk, looking like she owned the place. She was all smiles at first, but I could see something in her eyes. It wasn't warmth, it was like she already knew why I was there, and it wasn't good. I asked her straight up, why is the land being sold off? Who gave the approval for this? She just sat there for a second, tapping her pen on the desk, then gave me this kind of a half smile. Everything is in order, she said. We've got the legal permissions. It's all been approved by the board, and the community's behind it. She made it sound so simple, so clean, like there was nothing to question. But I wasn't buying it. I pushed, I need to see the paperwork. You can't just tell me it's all good and expect me to walk away. This is my land, my people. I need to see the approvals. She looked at me like I had two heads. You know how these things work, right? The signatures are in order. Everything's been signed off by the right people. But the thing is, she couldn't give me a straight answer. She kept deflecting, pushing back, and that's when I knew this wasn't right. I tried to keep my cool, but inside I was starting to lose it. I pressed her again. Who exactly signed off on this? Show me the documents. She sighed, leaned back in her chair, and gave me a look like I was a problem she just wanted to get rid of. I'll have someone get them to you, but trust me, it's all above board. There's nothing to worry about. That was the first time I knew she was lying. She promised to send me the papers, but something told me that was just a way to get me out of her office without pushing too hard. And sure enough, a couple of days went by and I didn't hear a word. No papers, no calls, nothing. I wasn't about to let it slide, so I went back, walked right in, same as before, and demanded those documents. At first, she gave me this innocent, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I must have forgotten," routine. But by then, I was done playing nice. That's when she finally handed me something, one sheet of paper. But it wasn't what I was looking for. It was just some vague approval letter, not the official signatures, not the real stuff that would prove any of this was legitimate. It was like a cover-up, something designed to make it look like I was getting what I wanted, but really, it was a joke. That was my first real taste of how deep the corruption went. Karen wasn't just avoiding me, she was actively hiding the truth, manipulating the situation to protect her own interests. It was clear now, this wasn't just a misunderstanding or a small mistake. She was part of the problem, and she wasn't going to let anyone get in the way of her little deal, no matter who it hurt. I left her office that day with a gut feeling that told me one thing. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore, it was personal. She wasn't going to let me get close to the truth easily, but I was done asking. Now, I was ready to take whatever steps it took to find out what was really going on. That was the moment I realized this fight wasn't just about land. It was about everything, and I had to win. After that meeting with Karen, I knew I had to step it up. She had made it clear that she wasn't going to play by the rules, so I sure as hell wasn't going to either. But at first, I thought I could handle this the way I had handled everything else in my life. Head on, clean, and straightforward. I figured I'd just keep pushing, keep asking for answers until I got the truth. Simple, right? Well, turns out, not so much. I started by going through every document I could get my hands on. Anything that had to do with the land, the mining project, the HOA, it all had to be there somewhere. But every time I thought I was getting closer to something real, the door would slam shut in my face. I called the people on the approval lists. They wouldn't talk. I went to the local government offices. Nothing but dead ends. Even the people who had been living on the reservation for years were starting to pull back. You could tell they didn't want to get involved. But here's the thing. I was raised to fight for what's mine, and this land, it's mine. It's my family's. So I couldn't let go, no matter how many doors closed on me. But each time I dug deeper, Karen and the HOA made it harder. They weren't just hiding things, they were actively shutting me out. One afternoon, I was at the local diner, just grabbing a coffee and trying to put things together in my head. That's when one of the guys I used to know from around here, Gary, a longtime resident of the reservation, sat down across from me. He looked around nervously before he spoke. "I know what you're doing, man, but you better be careful." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He glanced over his shoulder before leaning in closer. "The HOA's got a lot more power than you think. And Karen, she's not just some office manager. She's tied in with people you don't want to mess with." Now I was listening. Gary wasn't the kind of guy who threw around threats or warnings for no reason. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice even more. "There's money in this. Big money. And it's not just the company behind the mining. Karen's got her hands in the pot too. Don't go poking around too much or you'll end up in a hole you can't get out of." I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that the woman I was fighting could be that deep into corruption. But hearing it from Gary, it made things feel different, more real. And if I was going to keep pushing, I knew I couldn't just go in blind anymore. I needed something to hold over her, something that would make her crack. So I kept digging, and the deeper I went, the more I realized Karen wasn't playing by any rules. She had her hands in everything, pulling strings wherever she could. The more I looked into the mining company, the more I saw how connected it was to local politicians, business owners, and surprise, other members of the HOA. They were all covering each other's backs, playing a game I wasn't even invited to. And that's when things started to escalate. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about power, about control. And the more I pushed, the harder they pushed back. One day, I was getting ready to meet with a lawyer I'd been in contact with, trying to get some real legal help. We were meeting in a coffee shop, nothing too official, just trying to feel things out. I walked in a little early, got a table by the window, but as I sat there, I noticed something strange. A car kept driving by the shop. I didn't think much of it at first, but after the fourth time, I started to get that uneasy feeling in my gut. I stood up and walked out the back exit, trying not to look too obvious, but sure enough, the car pulled up as I was stepping into the alley. I turned the corner and saw it clearly now. Someone in the back seat was watching me, just sitting there. I didn't know if it was just some random coincidence or if I was getting paranoid, but that was the moment when I knew it wasn't just Karen anymore. This was bigger. People were watching me. They were following my every move. I still met with the lawyer, but by the time we wrapped up, I could feel the walls closing in. There were whispers everywhere. People in town who I thought I could trust were now avoiding me. Neighbors, friends, even family, they all started pulling back. It was like they were scared, like they knew something I didn't, or maybe they just didn't want to get caught in whatever storm was coming. And then I got a phone call. It was from the lawyer. "We've got a problem," he said. "There's been some movement on the paperwork you asked about. Someone's trying to shut it all down. Someone's making sure it never sees the light of day." At first, I didn't get it. What do you mean, shut it down? But then he told me something that stopped me cold. "The documents you wanted? They're not just lost. They're gone. Someone took them." That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just hiding the truth. She was destroying it. And this wasn't some petty land grab anymore. She was willing to go to any lengths, to protect her little empire. Whatever this was, it was bigger than I ever imagined. And I was in deeper than I realized. It wasn't just me against Karen anymore. It was me against an entire system. One that would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. But I wasn't going to back down, no matter what came next. At first, I really thought I could handle this the way I've handled most things in my life. Calm, collected, and straight to the point. I wasn't about to make a scene or go off half-cocked. If I could just prove that what Karen and the HOA were doing was wrong, maybe I could get everyone on my side. Maybe we could fix this without all the drama. I didn't want to be that guy who burned bridges just to prove a point. I wanted to believe that there was still some room for reason. So I started reaching out to people who might be able to help, people I thought had the power to put a stop to this mess. I started with the lawyer I'd met up with a few weeks before. He was a straight shooter, nothing flashy. I'd known him for years and figured if anyone could give me advice, it would be him. We met at a park one afternoon. I was feeling pretty hopeful. He had the experience, the know-how. We could figure out how to go through the right channels and get everything reversed. But after listening to me lay it all out, everything I'd discovered, all the shady dealings, he just looked at me and sighed. "Man, this is bigger than you think," he said, rubbing his forehead. "This isn't just a case of bad paperwork or people not doing their jobs. You're up against a whole system here. You're talking about the HOA, a mining company, probably some local officials. They're all in this together, and they're not going to back down just because you found a few wrong signatures." I wanted to believe he was wrong. I wanted to believe that if I kept pushing, the truth would come out, and the people who were wronged would stand up with me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized he was right. The people I needed to talk to weren't going to be on my side. The system was set up to keep things just like this, quiet, controlled, and out of sight. Still, I didn't want to give up. I couldn't just walk away from this. So I decided to take a different approach. I figured if I couldn't get the lawyer to help, maybe I could talk to the people involved, talk to the community, get them on my side. After all, this was our land, our future. I called a meeting with a few of the elders from my tribe. These were the people who had seen it all, who knew the land like the back of their hands and understood the weight of what was at stake. I hoped that if I could get them to see how bad things had gotten, maybe they'd step in and put a stop to it. The meeting was held at the community center. It was just a few of us there, sitting around a table. It felt like something important was about to happen, like we could finally do something to turn the tide. But as I laid everything out, the mining operation, the shady documents, Karen's involvement, it quickly became clear that the elders weren't as fired up as I thought they'd be. They listened, nodded, and exchanged a few glances, but there was no urgency, no anger, just resignation. One of the elders, an older man named John, spoke up. "We've been through a lot, son. We've fought this kind of fight before, but sometimes you have to pick your battles. The land, it's always been part of us, but what's really important is how we move forward. Fighting this, pushing too hard, it could tear us apart." It hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd spent so much time thinking about what was right for the land, for my people, that I hadn't really thought about the consequences. I wasn't just challenging Karen or the HOA, I was challenging everything these people had worked for. They weren't going to take on a fight they couldn't win, not when it meant risking the peace of the whole community. "Are you saying we should just let them do this?" I asked, my voice a little sharper than I intended. John sighed. "It's not about letting them, son. It's about knowing when to let go. We can't afford to be dragged into a battle we can't win. Some things are better left alone." I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to accept that. But the more I looked around the room at the faces of the elders, the more I understood. They were tired. Tired of fighting, tired of losing, tired of seeing their people torn apart by forces they couldn't control. This wasn't just about the land. It was about a lifetime of struggles they'd lived through and survived. They weren't going to risk everything on a battle they weren't sure they could win. It wasn't just them, either. As I talked to more people in the community, I started to see the same pattern. No one wanted to rock the boat. Everyone was too scared, too tired, and the ones who weren't scared were the ones who had already bought into the idea that things could be better if they just went along with what was happening. I couldn't blame them. It's easier to pretend everything is fine than to fight a battle that might destroy everything you've worked for. But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just stand by and watch them hand over everything that meant anything to us. So I kept trying. I went to the local officials, tried to talk to people who were supposedly on our side. But each time I showed up, it felt like I was talking to a wall. No one wanted to get involved. They'd smile, tell me they understood, maybe even say they'd look into it, but nothing changed. They didn't care. And Karen, she wasn't even pretending anymore. Every time I went back to her office, she acted like I was nothing more than a nuisance. Her answers became shorter, her smile more forced. And every time I left her office, it was like she'd turned the volume down a little more on whatever fight I had left in me. I tried to go the legal route again, this time with a few other contacts I'd made, hoping one of them could help me make sense of the mess. But they all said the same thing. "It's too big. You can't win this alone. You need more backing." But I had nothing left. No more allies, no more options. I'd exhausted every possibility I could think of, and that's when I started to really feel it, the weight of the whole thing. Every door had slammed shut, and I was standing there in the middle of it, holding on to something that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. So I stopped trying to play it cool. I stopped pretending like I could fix everything with just the right words or the right people. It was time to figure out what I was really dealing with, and this time I wasn't going to wait for anyone to give me permission. So here I am, exhausted, running out of options, and feeling like I'm about to hit a wall. It's like the whole world had conspired to stop me from figuring this out. Every time I thought I was getting close to something, every time I thought I had a lead, it'd disappear. I wasn't giving up yet, but honestly, I was running on fumes. But then came the twist, the one thing I didn't see coming. It started one night when I was going through some old files. I was at my place, sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and old receipts, just trying to make sense of it all. At this point, I'd seen so many documents, so many signatures, all of it was starting to blur together. I had all the names, all the approval forms, all the so-called legally binding paperwork that Karen and the HOA had shoved in my face. I thought I was missing something, that there had to be a key piece of evidence I wasn't seeing. That's when I found it. One of the documents wasn't like the others. It was a simple, nondescript envelope slipped in between a pile of old paperwork I'd set aside. There was no stamp, no letterhead. It just had the HOA's address on it. I opened it without thinking much, but as soon as I saw what was inside, I froze. It was a contract, a legal document, but it wasn't like the other ones. This one was unsigned, and the signature lines were all marked for internal use only. The language in the contract was odd too, vague, disjointed, but what really caught my attention were the notes scribbled at the bottom. I leaned in closer, squinting at the small handwriting, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was a note from Karen. Make sure the signatures are legit before submission. The payment needs to be processed before the project starts. My mind started racing. That phrase, the payment needs to be processed, stuck with me. Because up until that point, I'd assumed Karen was just manipulating documents and lying to me. But this wasn't just about signing off on land deals. This was about money. A lot of money. And that's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. Karen wasn't just taking bribes. She was running a scam, one that involved everything. The whole land deal, the mining company, the people in the HOA, it was all set up to funnel money right into her pocket. It wasn't just about securing a few signatures here and there. She had orchestrated a scheme to line her own pockets by taking money under the table from the company. I sat there for a minute, my heart pounding. The air in the room felt thick. This wasn't just bad paperwork or shady dealings. This was illegal. The land was being stolen. My people's land was being used as a pawn in some twisted game, and Karen wasn't just guilty of bending the rules, she was the mastermind behind it. I picked up the phone and called the lawyer I'd tried to work with earlier. My voice was a little shaky, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. "Listen, I think I found something," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. "It's Karen. She's been taking money from the mining company. I found a document, proof of it." There was a long pause on the other end. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, serious. "Are you sure? Because if what you're telling me is true, this is way bigger than just a land dispute. You're talking about serious criminal activity. You need to be careful." I didn't need him to tell me that. I knew. But what choice did I have now? I couldn't just walk away. Not when I had the proof. Not when I knew the whole thing was built on lies. I spent the next few hours going over the document again and again, making sure I wasn't missing something. But it was crystal clear now. Karen had been paid, handsomely, to push this whole mining project through, and in return, she'd sold out everything that my people had. It wasn't just a case of greed. It was outright betrayal. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to play by anyone else's rules anymore. This wasn't a fight I could win by simply asking for documents or trying to work within the system. I had the smoking gun. It was time to expose her for what she was and take this whole corrupt system down. But I had to be smart. I couldn't rush in and make a scene. If I did, Karen and the others would just bury it all, cover it up, make it disappear. I had to plan my next move carefully, make sure I wasn't the one left holding the bag when this all came crashing down. But in that moment, as I sat there holding the document in my hands, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Hope. The kind of hope that only comes when you know, deep down, that you finally have the upper hand. And for the first time in a long while, I knew I was going to win this thing. Now that I had the smoking gun, the proof I needed to take Karen down, I knew I had to be careful about how I moved forward. I couldn't just barge into her office, wave the document around, and scream, "Gotcha!" That would be the quickest way to make sure I'd never see a day in court, let alone win this fight. No, I needed a plan. And not just any plan. I needed something airtight, something that would take down Karen and everyone else involved, without leaving any room for them to wiggle out of it. I sat down that night, just staring at the document, my hands clenched tight around it. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was everything. This was my tribe's land, my family's future, and all the lies and corruption that had been buried under layers of bureaucracy and manipulation. Karen thought she could get away with it. She thought no one would ever notice, or if they did, they wouldn't have the guts to fight back. But I was done playing it safe. First thing I knew I had to do was get this document into the right hands. If I just handed it over to the authorities, Karen would have it swept under the rug before I could blink. I needed someone who had the power to make this stick, someone who couldn't be bought off. I thought about it for a while, and then it hit me. The press. It wasn't just about a legal battle anymore. The only way to expose the corruption fully, to make sure Karen couldn't hide behind her connections, was to put it all out in the open. But I didn't want to just send the documents off to some random reporter. I had to find someone who would actually care about the story, someone with the guts to take on a battle this big. So I did some digging and found a journalist, Jackie Mitchell. She'd covered corruption in local politics before, and I'd seen her name pop up a few times on stories that had actually made a difference. If anyone could turn this into a story that the whole town would hear, it was her. I reached out, and after a few days of back and forth, we agreed to meet. We sat down at a small cafe, and I handed her the documents. She didn't ask many questions at first, just skimmed through them, and I could see her face start to change as she read. I could tell she was getting what I was getting. This was big. It wasn't just about land being sold. This was about money, corruption, and the betrayal of an entire community. "I don't need to tell you how serious this is," she said, folding the papers back up and slipping them into her bag. "This is more than just a local story. You're talking about a scandal that reaches way beyond this reservation." I nodded, feeling the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. I don't want just a headline. I want this thing exposed for what it is. I want Karen and everyone else involved to be held accountable. She leaned in closer, her eyes focused. "I'll help you, but you need to be prepared. This isn't just about getting her to confess. It's about making sure everyone knows what happened. We'll need more than just this document. We'll need interviews, sources, facts. You need to be ready for a fight, because once this gets out, there's no turning back." I thought about that for a second. She was right, of course. I wasn't just asking her to print a story. I was asking her to help me bring down an entire system, and the fallout was going to be massive. But I wasn't afraid. I had the truth, and I knew it would be worth whatever came next. The plan began to form in my mind, piece by piece. I needed to start gathering everything I could, anything that would support the documents I had, any witness who could confirm the scam, any evidence that would tie Karen to the money. The thing was, I knew the people around here. I knew that anyone with a job in the HOA, anyone connected to Karen, would be too scared to come forward. The threat of losing their job or worse made them shut their mouths. But what about the people who had already been affected? What about the ones who had lost their land and were too afraid to speak up? I reached out to a few old friends, people I knew wouldn't hesitate to back me up. Slowly, the pieces started falling into place. People who had seen Karen's shady dealings firsthand started coming forward, giving me little bits of information that, when put together, painted a clear picture. I was careful about who I trusted, though. Not everyone would have the courage to stand up against her, but the ones who did, they had been waiting for someone to finally take action. Once I had enough testimonies, enough evidence to make my case stronger, I went back to Jackie. She was ready. We started putting everything together. We worked on the angle, the corruption, the bribes, the backdoor deals that had kept Karen in power for so long. I knew this wasn't going to be a quick fix. This was going to take time, careful strategy, and a hell of a lot of work. But this was the only way I was going to make sure that Karen didn't get away with it. And then I had to deal with Karen herself. She wasn't going to just hand over the keys to her little empire without a fight. So I made sure I had all my ducks in a row. When I went to her next, I wasn't going to be asking for documents anymore. I wasn't going to be playing by her rules. This was it. I was going to expose her, and I was going to do it in the only way that would make sure the truth came out. No more asking, no more begging. This was my fight now, and I was ready to win. As the plan started to take shape, I could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my people, my tribe, and I wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else take that from us. We were going to fight back, and this time I wasn't going to lose. So the plan was in motion. I had the evidence, the testimony, and Jackie was working hard on putting the story together. We were taking our time, making sure everything was lined up perfectly. I felt like we were getting close. But I knew the moment we went public with this, everything would change. Karen wouldn't just sit back and let this happen. She was too powerful, too connected. I could feel it in my gut. She'd come at me hard, and I had to be ready. It wasn't long before I started noticing things. Small things at first, like cars slowing down when they passed my house. People I didn't recognize hanging around the neighborhood. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. After all, I had just gotten myself involved in something way bigger than I had ever imagined. But then it started to escalate. One evening, I was walking back from the store when I saw a man standing near my driveway, looking like he was waiting for someone. I walked past him, trying to keep my cool, but he didn't even acknowledge me. He just stared at me as I passed. That's when I knew. Karen was already making her move. The next day, I got a call from Jackie. She was frantic. "Someone's been snooping around the files," she said. "They're trying to cover their tracks. It looks like Karen's been informed. They're getting ready to destroy the evidence before we can go public." I felt the blood drain from my face. The clock was ticking. If they destroyed the evidence before we could release it, everything I had done would have been for nothing. I had to act fast. I called a few people who I knew were still loyal, who still believed in what we were doing. I couldn't trust everyone. Hell, I couldn't even trust half the people in my own community anymore. But there were a few who had seen enough of Karen's manipulation to want to take her down. Together, we made sure everything was backed up. Files were saved, copies were made, and I had everything ready to go. There was no way Karen was getting away with this. I was ready to fight back. That night, I met with Jackie. She had everything ready. Her article was solid, the facts were all there, and the story was going to be explosive. But then she told me something that made my heart drop into my stomach. They've got people working for them. Inside the press, inside the local government, even inside law enforcement. If we go public now, we'll have no protection. They'll discredit the whole thing. They'll ruin your reputation before we even get started. It hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just Karen. It was a whole network of people who were willing to go to any lengths to protect the scam they had going on. They were watching me, listening in, and waiting for the moment I slipped up. And I knew I couldn't just rely on the truth to carry me through this anymore. I had to outsmart them. I had to be one step ahead. I told Jackie we'd wait. We had to be patient. We had to find a way to hit them when they weren't expecting it. So we bided our time. But that didn't mean I was sitting back and waiting for the perfect moment. Oh no. I knew Karen wasn't going to wait for me to make my move. She was already making her counterattack. It started small at first. There were rumors that the HOA was trying to undermine me, telling people I was out for personal gain, that I was lying about everything. Then, out of nowhere, my phone started blowing up with calls from people I didn't know. Strangers, reporters, local officials, all of them questioning my credibility, throwing dirt on my name. Some were just looking to get a scoop, others clearly working for Karen, trying to get inside my head. And there were threats too. It was subtle at first, a comment here or there about how things could escalate if I didn't drop it. But soon, the tone changed. People started to get more direct. And that's when I realized Karen wasn't just trying to shut me down legally or professionally. She was going after me personally. One night, my car was vandalized, tires slashed, paint scratched off. Nothing too extreme, but it sent a clear message. We know where you live. We can get to you anytime. I was pissed, obviously, but I also knew this was exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to back down, to be intimidated, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I went full force with my plan. I knew I couldn't take her down just by being reactive. I had to be proactive. I started reaching out to the people she thought she could control, the ones who were too scared to speak out, the ones who didn't want to lose their jobs or their place in the community. One by one, I got them to open up. I'd meet them in person. I'd make sure they understood what was at stake. Slowly but surely, I started collecting even more damning evidence. A few of them agreed to testify on record. A few more started whispering about how they had been pressured into signing papers they didn't understand. Then I pulled the ultimate move. I leaked a portion of the article Jackie had written, a teaser, just enough to stir things up. The next day, the local news outlets were flooded with calls. People were talking, asking questions. I knew Karen would flip out, and she did. She called in every favor she had, trying to cover up the story before it spread. But it was too late. The pressure was mounting. The community was starting to wake up. They were realizing that they'd been manipulated, lied to, and sold out. People began coming forward. One by one, they spoke up, sharing what they knew. The more the story spread, the harder it was for Karen and her allies to control the narrative. And as the media started to pick up on it, more people started to ask questions, including people outside the community, people who had no connection to Karen, but who were more than willing to expose corruption. Karen's team began scrambling, sending out damage control, trying to deny everything, but the truth was out there now, and it was no longer something they could suppress. I couldn't believe it at first, but then I realized something. We were winning. We were making it happen, and Karen, who thought she was untouchable, was finally being cornered. I was tired, more tired than I'd ever been in my life, but I knew we were getting close. Karen was about to lose everything, and this time it was my turn to take back what was mine. The moment of truth was finally here. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. Everything I had worked for, the countless hours digging through documents, meeting with people who were too scared to speak up, pulling all the pieces together, was about to come to a head. Karen was about to be exposed for what she truly was, a liar, a manipulator, a fraud. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my tribe, for the land that had been sold out, and for everyone who had been silenced by fear. Jackie and I had worked tirelessly over the past few weeks, piecing together the story of Karen's corruption. Every bit of information we had gathered, the shady dealings, the falsified documents, the bribes, was all about to come to light. And now, it was time. Time to blow this whole thing wide open. We had planned it down to the last detail. Jackie had set up interviews with several key people who were ready to go public. We had evidence, we had testimonies, and most importantly, we had the truth on our side. But this wasn't just about writing an article or getting a few clicks. This was about creating a storm that would leave Karen with nowhere to hide. The day we were ready to go public, I was a bundle of nerves. I felt like I could barely breathe. I kept thinking about how everything was going to change, how Karen would retaliate, how my life would never be the same again. But then I remembered everything I'd gone through to get to this point. All the late nights, all the frustration, all the threats. This was the moment I had worked for. There was no going back. Jackie and I sat down in her office as she hit send on the final draft. The article was live. It was out there for the world to see. It didn't take long for the storm to start. By the time I left her office, the phones were ringing off the hook. Local news stations were calling, wanting interviews, wanting more details. People I hadn't talked to in years started reaching out to me, some offering support, others just shocked at what they were reading. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The truth was out, and Karen's carefully crafted empire of lies was crumbling in real time. But of course, Karen didn't go down without a fight. Within hours of the story breaking, she was on the defensive, calling in favors, trying to discredit the article, calling it fake news. She had her team of lawyers working overtime, sending out cease and desist letters, threatening lawsuits, anything to shut it down. But it was too late. The story had already gone viral. People were sharing it, talking about it, and calling out her corruption in the streets. The more Karen tried to silence us, the louder the outcry became. And then came the protests. They started small, just a handful of people outside the HOA office, holding up signs demanding accountability. But within days, it grew. It was like a wave had formed, with people from all over the area coming out to voice their anger and frustration. The local media was all over it, covering every move Karen made, broadcasting the outrage. The pressure was building, and she could feel it. The thing that hit me hardest, though, was how quickly people came forward. The community I had always known, the ones who had been too scared to speak up before, were now standing in the open, united. They were telling their stories of how Karen had manipulated them, how she had taken advantage of their trust. Some of them hadn't even realized how deep the corruption went until they saw the article. But now, they were part of the movement. They weren't going to let her get away with it. Not anymore. It felt surreal, like I was watching everything unfold from the outside. The protests, the news coverage, the social media posts. Karen was no longer the queen of this town. She was being dragged into the light, exposed for the fraud she was, and the more people learned about what she had done, the more her influence shriveled up. But I wasn't done yet. No, not by a long shot. I had the article out there, but that wasn't the endgame. I needed to make sure Karen's connections, those people who had helped her cover everything up, didn't escape unscathed. I knew they were going to try to bury everything, to sweep it all under the rug as if it never happened. But this time, I wasn't going to let that happen. The local authorities had no choice but to take action. People were demanding answers, and the pressure was too much for them to ignore. Investigations started opening up, and Karen's shady dealings came under a microscope. I knew it wouldn't be easy to get her locked up or put behind bars, but the wheels were finally in motion. She wasn't going to just waltz away from this. And then came the icing on the cake, the moment I had been hoping for. The arrest. It wasn't just Karen who got taken down, either. The entire network of people who had helped her, the ones who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, started getting exposed one by one. They couldn't hide anymore. The truth was out there, and it wasn't going away. I remember watching the news that night, the footage of Karen being led out of her office in handcuffs. I didn't feel a sense of satisfaction, though. It was relief, mostly. Relief that this fight was over. Relief that I had done everything I could to expose the truth. And even though it wasn't over yet, there were still investigations to follow and more people to hold accountable, I could finally breathe a little easier. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for my tribe, for my people, for the land that Karen had tried to sell off. It was a victory for anyone who had been pushed aside, silenced, or made to feel like their voices didn't matter. Because in the end, the truth won. And that's something that no one, no matter how powerful they were, could ever take away. So yeah, the world knew now. Karen was exposed, and nothing was going to stop the tidal wave of change that was coming next. It's funny how quickly things can change. One moment, you're standing in the middle of a storm, fighting to keep your head above water, and the next, it's all over. Everything is settled, and while the world may be turning again, it feels quieter now, more peaceful, almost like I can breathe again. Karen's gone. I don't mean that in a metaphorical sense either. She's facing charges, along with a bunch of her cronies, for everything she did to sell out my people. It's crazy to think about. There were times I wondered if I'd ever see the day when she wouldn't be able to control things with her smug smile and her phony charm. But now, the people who were once too afraid to speak up have found their voices, and they're not backing down. I don't know what happened to Karen once the legal wheels started turning. I stopped paying attention. That's her problem now. The thing is, as much as I fought for this, I didn't feel this overwhelming sense of victory when it all came crashing down. Yeah, it felt good to see her exposed for what she was, but it also felt strange. All that anger, all that frustration, all that fear. Now that it was done, there was this emptiness that I didn't know how to fill. I thought winning would fix everything. That if I just took down Karen and her little empire of lies, things would go back to normal. But nothing ever really goes back to the way it was, does it? What happened to Karen wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting what was ours, about standing up for the land, the culture, the community that had been pushed aside for so long. But in the end, I'm not sure if I've won anything more than just a little piece. Maybe that's enough, though. Maybe it doesn't always have to be about some grand, sweeping victory. Sometimes it's just about getting your life back. The land's still there. It's still ours. And the fight for it? Well, that fight isn't over, but it's different now. The people who used to be scared are waking up, realizing they don't have to sit back and let others decide what happens to them. The next generation is looking at things differently, too. My kids? They're not growing up the way I did. They're seeing how things can change if you stand up for what's right, no matter how big or small the fight might seem. Liza's been incredible through all of this. At the beginning, I wasn't sure how this would affect our family. The pressure was immense, but she was my rock. She's been by my side through everything, and I'm grateful for that. Sometimes I think she saw the bigger picture even when I was too caught up in the mess of it all. Her belief in me and what we were doing was something I could always count on. I don't know what would have happened if she hadn't been there. I don't think I'll ever forget the day when everything started to turn around, when the truth was finally out there and people started coming together. That was the day I realized something important. This isn't just about me or about Karen. It's about something much bigger, something deeper than we ever understood. The land, the people, the community, it all matters. It's not about some big corporate deal or some corrupt individual thinking they can buy their way out of responsibility. It's about the connection we all share, even when we're not always aware of it. Life's slower now. I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next threat or the next attack. The pressure is gone, and while that peace is nice, it's also a little unfamiliar. I spend more time with my family now. Liza and I have been talking more, not about the fight anymore, but about what comes next. About how we want to raise our kids, the lessons we want them to learn, and the values we want to pass down to them. It feels like there's room to breathe again. I don't have all the answers. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand everything that happened or why it had to go down the way it did. But I do know this. I'll never stop fighting for what's right. For my family, for my people, and for the land that has been the heart of it all. Maybe I didn't change the world, but I did change something, and that's enough for me. So yeah, things are calmer now. The fight's over, for now at least, and maybe it's time for me to start figuring out what life looks like when you don't have to constantly be at war. But one thing's for sure, I'm not done yet. There's always something to fight for, and whatever comes next, I'll be ready.